Welcome to Session 7. In the book of Joshua, we hear these words, "After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' aide, 'Moses, my servant is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross into the Jordan River, into the land I'm going to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I had promised to Moses. Your territory will extend across the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them.'" This part of the story will take us from the death of Moses and the transfer of leadership from Moses to Joshua to the beginning of the monarchy, that is to Saul, David, Solomon. So this is the part of the story that happens after Moses now has finished his ministry and his leadership. Joshua is now assuming the leadership role, and God comes now to Joshua and says to him, reminds him that he had made promises to Abraham, and that he had kept those promises throughout the time of the leadership of Moses, and that God is going to continue to keep those promises and to honor the covenant that he had made with Abraham and the covenant that was established at Mount Sinai through Moses. And so Joshua gets a wonderful affirmation as he begins his leadership role that God is still there, the covenant is still in place, the promises of Abraham have not been forgotten, and that God intends to fully deliver on all that he had promised in times past. Oftentimes, those of us who are Western readers call these books or refer to some of the books that we'll be looking at, like Joshua and Judges, books like 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, as historical books. And it is true that they tell of historical events and realities. However, when the Israelites, or in the Israelite culture, ancient culture, when individuals wrote these kinds of books, they were actually, and particularly in the case of the Bible, the writers were writing from a deeply theological perspective. In our world, the goal is, even though if we don't get to it or come close to it, the goal is to be, fair and objective when reporting historical events. We want to know exactly what happened, how it really did happen, who was involved, and those kinds of issues. When we are reading the Bible, there is a thread that runs through this, and it is not asking exactly the same questions that we are asking from our particular perspectives. In the Bible, these stories revolve around, and they depend upon an understanding of things like God's promises and the keeping of the covenant. And God has made this incredible covenant with his people. And obviously there are terms to the covenant, both on the side of God and on the side of the people. So when these stories are told, they are actually told in the larger context of what does this do in terms of the covenant? In what ways does God remain faithful in light of the fact that the people are not always faithful? In what ways does the reality that the people are not always faithful impact the covenant itself? So in the book of Joshua and Judges and others I just mentioned with you, the real thrust of the book and the real movement of the book is to see it and hear it and read it in terms of this covenant, these terms of relationship that God has established with His people. So sometimes it doesn't seem as if it is necessarily in strict chronological order, or it may seem as if some time has gone by and all of a sudden you come to a place and you stop there. All of that is fully intentional by the writers, because their interest and their point of view as they are relating these stories is to do so in terms of, or in context of the covenant of God. So as we just kind of take a brief journey through Joshua and Judges, just keep in mind that the Bible writer's intention is to always be showing us that these events are not just events that are being reported as if they were to be on the evening news. These are events that take place in light of and in context of God being with people, of God's relationship, or terms of relationship with people, and with the promises that God has made long ago. So, after Moses dies, Joshua becomes the new leader. He had served for a number of years as the assistant to Moses, and you will recall that Joshua was one of the spies that, when sent on the original mission, came back. He and Caleb were two of the 12 who said that they should go into the land of promise, and but the people rebelled against that. They were intimidated by the largeness of the cities and the size of the people, those kinds of things. And so, as you recall, that generation of people spent 40 years in the wilderness, and that generation died off. Moses spoke to the second generation, the new generation, before they were entering into the promised land, but Moses himself was not able to enter into the promised land, but Joshua is. When you're reading the story of the people actually now beginning to go into the promised land, one of the things of interest that you'll want to look at and keep in mind is that as the people cross the Jordan River going into Canaan, there are many ways in which that is something of a reminder or a recall of Moses leading the people through the Red Sea. God obviously opens up the Red Sea, and the people of Israel pass with Egypt coming behind them. And now they are at the Jordan River, and again, God opens up the river, and the entire nation is able to walk through that river on dry ground. And so obviously there's just some incredible, beautiful, powerful parallels that what God had done in delivering the people from Egypt, He is now doing those things again in delivering the people to the promised land. So the people are going to pass into the promised land through the Jordan River, which, by the way, is in its flood stage. And the priests are instructed to carry the ark. A priest from each of the 12 tribes is selected, and those 12 priests are going to carry the ark, and they lead out in this procession. And as they step their foot into the water, to the Jordan River, the waters part, and the priests stand in the middle of the river holding the ark, and the people are going to pass by, and a beautiful symbolism again and a recall of what had happened in the past. And as the people certainly are walking on dry land through the Jordan River, or across the Jordan River, each one of them pass by the Ark of the Covenant, certainly a powerful and a potent reminder that God is with them and God is in their midst, and it is God who is doing these things. Also, as a reminder, an individual from each of the 12 tribes selects a stone and brings it to the other side. And after all of the people have passed through, and God sends the waters back, or the river back to its normal flood staging, at the first night where the people camp, those 12 stones are piled together as an ever reminder of what God had done on that occasion. So there are just a number of wonderful parallels between Moses and Joshua. When Joshua gets to the other side, one of the kind of amusing experiences that he has is that he sees an angel of the Lord standing before him, and his sword is drawn. And Joshua's initial reaction seems to be that he's quite not certain what that is all about. He doesn't know whether it is an enemy. He doesn't know what it is. But it turns out to be a messenger from God, a way of saying that the battle is the Lord's. And as Joshua leads the people forward, and as they begin to go into the land of Canaan, that wherever there are victories, that it is the victory of God. It is the work of God. So Joshua sends a couple of spies, again reminiscent of Moses sending spies into Canaan. Now they're sending spies, or Joshua has 2 spies, into the city of Jericho. This will be their first opportunity to take the promised land. And in that story, the spies befriend Rahab, who is a harlot prostitute in the city, and God has the people marching around the city for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, with the Ark of the Covenant and the trumpet sounds, the city walls fall and the people are able to take the city. And of course, the only person or family that is saved is Rahab and her family. So there's a great victory, a great celebration, and right off the bat you can see that this is God's victory. It's not that the people had drawn their swords. All the people had to do was just be obedient to what God told them to do, and they were, as they walked around the city. When they plundered the city, God had set a ban on the city itself, a B-A-N, which basically means that that city was to be totally and fully dedicated to God, and in this case was to be totally and fully destroyed, apart from honoring the promise that had been made to Rahab. So as the Israelite soldiers go through, they just finish off the city and the families and individuals who live in it. The next city up is certainly not as formidable as Jericho is, but an interesting thing happens. As the Israelite soldiers advance on the city, they are turned back, and some of them even lose their lives, and they begin to flee. As a result of all of that, it comes to light that one of the Israelite soldiers, Achan, had in fact stole some things from Jericho. When he was in one of the homes, he saw a coat, beautiful Babylonian robe, saw some silver, some gold, and he sought to hide those things. And as a result of that, when they went to defeat Ai, which should have been quite an easy defeat, the Israelites were turned back. So as the story unfolds, we see really in a powerful way that it's not about the military might or the military strength of Israel. It's all about the covenant. God keeping promises, the Israelites keeping promises. Well, as it turns out in this story, this one Israelite breached the covenant. So all of that comes out, but it cost him his family, and it also caused this minor setback to Israel itself. So in the very onset of the book of Joshua, we see a number of places where it's all about the terms of the relationship, keeping the covenant, being faithful to the covenant, living in context of the covenant, and as the people take the land, they do so as a people who are living out the terms of the covenant. In a couple of places in the book of Joshua, there are actually covenant renewal ceremonies. And one of them will not be too far beyond this whole thing that unfolded with what happened in Ai and Achan's taking of the several items. So there is a covenant renewal, a time in which the people revisit the covenant, they hear again the terms of the covenant, and they have the opportunity to reaffirm their commitment to live in terms of the relationship that God has set forth. The last part of the book of Joshua is kind of a detail of how the land was parceled out among the various tribes. And it's almost as if you could just take a map and clearly identify that this particular tribe will go and this is their inheritance, this is where they settle. Another tribe would go and take this part of the inheritance. And so it seems very systematic. It looks very orderly. We get to the end of the book. There's another, now that the people have all gone to the places of their assignment, there is another opportunity for them to experience covenant renewal, and then the story is told of Joshua's death. But when you come to the book of Judges, now we get to see the heart of the people. Now we get to see what happens when the people are just living in rebellion against God, or they are not living in accord with the terms of the relationship, or they are living as if the promises to Abraham had never been stated. They are living, in fact, as if they had not come, in some cases, to take the land of Canaan, but as if they had come to join the land of Canaan. And so the book of Judges opens up, and we see some victories that the people do have, but on the other hand, there is quickly a number of instances in which the people did not follow through completely or fully with the terms of the covenant. They had some military success, but there were other times in which they fully did not eradicate the Canaanites or a tribe, clan, village, and all of that stuff is going to come back to certainly be a factor in how the entire book kind of lays out. So we see now that the people in their heart, in many ways, although there is some success, there's also a lot of rebellion, and the people begin to embrace some of the gods and some of the lifestyle of the people of Canaan itself. And in the storyline, God will send what is called a judge, not in terms of how we think of judges today, but in their time and in their context, a judge was just primarily a local military type hero that would respond when the people of God were seemingly about to be crushed or be offered a defeat by an enemy. So God will raise up various judges throughout the story. Now, the story of the judges themselves, and 12 of them are mentioned throughout the book. Some of them more in passing. Some of them we get some very interesting and quite honestly some very entertaining type stories from. But throughout or through the course of the entire book, you will see that God is raising judges, and in the various places that they serve, and they are not necessarily serving one after another. They seem to be serving perhaps at different places. Some of their terms of service might be overlapping with each other. And we see that the people are doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord. It becomes one of the phrases that you will see throughout the book of Judges. And there is a clear cycle that begins to unfold in this book. And it comes around frequently throughout the book. It reveals itself in the opening couple of chapters, and then you can almost see it coming as it unfolds time and time again. The cycle is this. We'll do it in 4 brief parts. The first part is that the people do evil in the sight of the Lord. And so there is covenant breach, and the people are becoming like the Canaanites, and they are becoming or accepting part of their religious practices. And then in response to the breach of the covenant, as the people are doing evil, the anger of God is roused, and when that happens, the people begin to suffer defeat in battle, and they begin to be oppressed by their enemies. When that begins to happen, the people begin to cry out to God again. An act of wanting to get back to the covenant, wanting to reestablish themselves with God, in a sense, just wanting to come back, repent, and they cry out to God for help. And God sends a judge, and there is deliverance. But the fourth part of the cycle is that the whole thing just repeats again. So the whole cycle goes through, the people do evil, God responds, the people cry out, God responds again, but this time with the deliverance with the judge, and all said and done, the people go right back through that cycle again. So, as you're reading the book of Joshua and you're reading the book of Judges, in many ways there are some similarities perhaps between reading the creation stories. When we were reading Genesis 1, a creation story, and reading Genesis 2, two different accounts, two different ways of God revealing to us His creation, and you have to kind of keep an eye on both. So when you're reading when you're reading one of them, you kind of read it in the context of the other. The same thing is true with the book of Joshua and Judges. You kind of have to read them with one eye on one while reading the other, and read them in context together, and you will see the tension that unfolds there. You'll see that Joshua tells the story in one way, or the story is told in Joshua in one way, and then the book of Judges comes around and really just opens us up to what is in the hearts of the people, the challenges they face, how they depart from God, how they at times just seem as if they willingly walk away from the covenant, and the covenant perhaps is in danger. God listens to their cry, He brings deliverance, and of all things, the same thing happens again. While all of that is happening, there's another story. And in the very next book, Ruth, God is also working in such a way that through the story of Ruth, and again, an outsider just like Rahab was, that in the story of Ruth and all that will unfold in that story, God is preparing the way for a future king to arrive. So, from the book of Joshua through Judges through Ruth, we're looking at that time and that space where Joshua now has assumed leadership. He has died. The people now are dependent upon judges for some measure of leadership and survival, and they are doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord. And when it's all said and done at the end of the book of Judges, they are just freely living out and doing just unparalleled evil and everything that they want to do in the eyes of God. And they are breaching the covenant left and right. And yet, God is working to create a future dynasty, which will obviously feature David. So, as you come together in this session, I hope you'll have a wonderful time just learning together and gaining some new insights about how you read books like Joshua and Judges in light of the fact that the message that they convey is really a message that focuses on and centers around the covenant. So as that kind of settles in on you and you reconsider, you take another look at the stories that you see in Joshua and Judges, or you read portions of those books, keep in mind that at the forefront of all of that is the whole covenant issue. And as you're reading those stories, see them in terms of God's covenant and how the people are responding to the covenant and in ways that they break that covenant and how God responds to all of that. You may also want to consider how the people that Moses led out of Egypt, in what ways they may be quite similar to the people that Joshua led into Canaan. And then furthermore, you may wish to take all of that and think about us. Think about yourselves. In what ways, as difficult as this might be for us, but this is how we read these stories and how they become relevant to us. In what ways, when we are honest, do we see ourselves as the people who have come into the wilderness, or how do we see ourselves as the people who, although have been rescued, we come into Canaan? And what ways do we see the faithfulness of God, even in the context of our own lives, our own churches, our own culture, our own times, our own day? In what ways do we see that God's promises have been faithful and God's promises have been true, and that He's very much working out His mission purpose among us? So I trust that you'll have a very enriching and wonderful time as you revisit the stories of Joshua and Judges.